Have you ever stopped to wonder what legal protections animals actually have in the Philippines? Well, today we're going to dive into the law that really started it all, Republic Act 8485, better known as the Animal Welfare Act of 1998. Let's unpack what it really says and why it's so important. But before we get into all the legalese, let's just take a step back and think about something a little more fundamental. As a community, as a society, what's the basic promise we make to the animals that share our world? What do we truly owe them? The law actually gives us a really direct answer right there in Section 1. Its purpose is crystal clear: to protect and promote the welfare of all animals. This isn't just some nice-sounding phrase. It's the mission statement for the entire act. It sets the tone for everything that follows. Okay, so you've got this big promise, but a promise is just words, right? Who's actually in charge of making sure it's kept? Well, the law is pretty smart about this, setting up a clear chain of command to turn that mission into real action. The main player here is the Bureau of Animal Industry, or the BAI. You can think of them as the chief regulators. They're the ones tasked with supervising pretty much everything, from your local pet shop all the way up to bigger places like zoos and research labs, to make sure that their facilities are safe, clean, and humane. But the BII isn't working in a vacuum here. Far from it. The law actually created a committee on animal welfare specifically to write the detailed rules. And this is the key part. It's not just a bunch of government folks in a room. You've got experts from the Philippine Veterinary Medical Association. You've got passionate advocates from groups like the Philippine Animal Welfare Society, and of course, officials from local government. This whole mix ensures the rules are both practical and compassionate. All right, so we know who is in charge. Now, the law gets into the what. See, it's one thing to say we have to protect animals, but it's a whole other challenge to legally define what it actually means to harm them. And this is such a huge deal, For a law like this to actually work, it can't just be about what feels wrong to someone. It has to draw a very clear line in the sand, defining exactly which actions cross over from just poor care into what is legally considered criminal cruelty. So, the law lays it out really clearly. On one side, you have acts that are just flat out illegal, things like torture, neglect, and organized animal fights. But, and this is a big but, the law also acknowledges some really complex, tough situations. It carves out very specific exceptions, like for religious rituals that are certified by the right agencies, or when a vet has to end an animal's incurable suffering. The key thing to remember is that these are meant to be narrow exceptions, not giant loopholes. And even when one of those exceptions applies, it's not like it's suddenly a free-for-all. No way. There is a strict, humane process that has to be followed. The reason must be legally allowed, the method has to be the most scientific and painless one they have, and the whole procedure has to be signed off on by that diverse committee we talked about. The focus always is on minimizing suffering. So the rules are set. We know what's not allowed. But what happens when someone just breaks them? A law without consequences is just a suggestion, right? Well, this law definitely has some teeth. Let's look at the penalties. First up, for anyone found guilty of breaking this law, we're talking about potential jail time. The sentence can range anywhere from 6 months all the way up to 2 years behind bars. Then there are the financial penalties. A court can also hit violators with a fine of 1,000 to 5,000 pesos. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. But you have to remember, this law was passed back in 1998, and that amount had a lot more weight to it back then. The law is also pretty smart about closing a couple of major loopholes. For instance, if a corporation is found guilty, you can't just blame the faceless company. No, the officer in charge is the one who's held accountable and serves the sentence. And if the violator happens to be a foreign national, they face deportation immediately after their sentence is up. So when you take a step back and look at all these pieces, the rules, the regulators, the penalties, what does it all really add up to? Why is a law from 1998 still so incredibly relevant today? Let's talk about its legacy. To put it simply, this was a total game changer. For the very first time, the Philippines had a single nationwide law that took the general idea of animal welfare and turned it into something real, something enforceable. It set the standard, it defined cruelty in legal terms, and it established real consequences. It was that promise to protect, finally written into law. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This act set the standard more than 2 decades ago, but as our understanding of animals and our relationship with them keeps changing and evolving, it really makes you ask, what does animal welfare mean to us right now, And what does that original promise from 1998 demand from us today?